Welcome back to When Bad Things Happen to Good People, a podcast about censorship and the arts. My name is Todd Sullivan. Joining me again is Peter Aman.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Glad to have you here.
I really want to see how this book ends, so thanks for having me back.
And we are talking about the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley.
Yeah, 1932, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, long time ago.
It was. It's, I don't know the math, but it's up there. It was like 2023 now, right? We're in 2023, so that's
91 years.
90, yeah, it's like we're 9 years away from the 100th anniversary of this book.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we'll get this technology going in the next 9 years.
So, yeah, we're starting on chapter 8, right?
That is right, yeah. We got a few chapters to get through here.
There's a bunch more chapters.
8 through 18.
Which is
11 chapters to get through. So
we're into 7.
We're going to have to motor here. We'll have to talk real quick.
Yep. So we got to get into it fast.
That's right.
Chapter 8 is really interesting because it gives us sort of a look into what John's life has been like.
Yeah. My note on this chapter, I like to title them. My title for chapter 8 was John's life.
Yeah.
And yeah, you really, it seems like he can remember really far back, like to his infancy, it kind of seemed like his first memories were, he's 1 or 2 years old kind of thing. Right. So, I'm not sure if that's part of life on the Savage Reservation or if that is just,
maybe if you're not consuming as much information into your brain, it's easier to retain the old stuff.
That's right. But yeah, he goes really far back.
Yeah.
His first memory there is of essentially being a young infant in bed with his mom when a nice large man kind of barges in.
Pope.
Yeah, is wanting to get busy, and she's like, not with John here, and
it just gets flung into another room.
Very like locked out, and away we go.
And that's a recurring image in his memories. This happens quite a lot, to the point that at one point he tries to stab Pope.
He does stab him.
He does stab him,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. I guess he attempts and
tries to kill him, perhaps, because Pope does stop him. But he gets a certain amount of respect from Pope. It's like,
Yeah.
Good try, kid.
Well, he kind of stares him down, right? Pope stares him down with the knife still in him. And then John starts crying because he's, kind of subdued, I guess, by the stare down. But yeah, he definitely has enough chances to go at him, that's for sure. And there's many more, men that seem to frequent the house, but we don't really catch any other names aside from Pope.
Yeah.
He was definitely the favorite. He also provided the mezcal beverage, right?
Yeah.
That, that Linda described as essentially soma, but with a terrible hangover.
Right.
Which she really enjoyed because it
was as close as she could get to soma.
Close as she could get. And I think that probably helped make her a little closer with Pope, right? Because he was that figure that stood out in John's mind as kind of the focus of, all the men that would have kind of passed through the bedroom.
Yeah, in a way, he represented them all to an extent. I think they also referenced, if not this chapter, then in an earlier one, that he occasionally brought peyote as well.
Yeah, I think there was one or two mentions of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, Linda was making sure that she was still continuing to keep herself as blissfully.
That's right. She was following the old ways or the new ways, the brave new world ways for sure. Yeah, definitely. I think also for her, right, being trapped in that world was a bit tough to take mentally, right? Like it was, kind of grating against her conditioning. And so having those options of the drink, even with the terrible hangover, right?
Yes.
Preferable to, because that was her condition.
Well, and wiping out the memory of being a mother, which is such a terrible, terrible thing in the Brave New World. There was also the fact that, and I don't remember exactly how this played out, but there was some sort of a rite of passage that when John was older, he basically got booted out of. He wasn't allowed to participate.
Yeah, so he had some memories of being younger and being kind of excluded. It was a real Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer situation there where he couldn't play in any of the Savage games. And then when he was kind of age, I think like 15 or 16, that's where they do the transition to manhood type rituals. And yeah, he was not allowed, even though he was had been preparing for it, maybe in parallel, maybe not directly with the other boys, but he had been.
But yeah, close enough to it that he could see what they were doing, get a sense of.
He was ready to go. Yeah, he was ready to do it. And he was excluded, but that didn't stop him. No, he went and did the ritual on his own and kind of went above and beyond. He kind of crucified himself or something.
Yeah, he splayed himself out on a rock with his arms out, baking in the sun.
Yeah,
like Jesus. He was trying to basically recreate what Jesus went through, and he stayed there until blacked out and fell off the rock.
Yeah,
which,
I mean,
we need reminders of why religion is maybe not a great thing. It's there.
But it was definitely a seminal moment, in his life, that, as well as there was a moment where he saw, he had a crush or, young love, this girl that was the object of his fixation when he was younger. I think that was kind of 15, 16 as well. And he saw her get married, which, obviously was not something he had really heard from Linda. And essentially, right, she's now off the market, not available to him, and he's really sad. He's upset about that, right? And this marriage is forever type idea, which is very different from what he's hearing at home from Linda, who's, the parade of dudes through the bedroom door. And now all of a sudden this, the woman that he had a crush on is forever out of his reach. And so that had a kind of profound impact, I think, as well, on more his sexual sense rather than his kind of manly sense. But yeah, so we've kind of gotten a little bit of how John is found or come to religion in a sense, right? And learned about death and love and, all that kind of stuff.
And it's all very old-fashioned. It's all very sort of what we consider society.
Almost, archaic in some ways, right?
Yeah, the religion is sort of a mashup of, I guess, what different cultures remember from their religions of the past.
Yeah.
But still the ideas of marriage and, not fucking every guy in the neighborhood. Or
he also seems to include some notions on, purity and, being noble or, being chaste of both mind and spirit and, stuff like that where, when he has impure thoughts and things, right, that's something that, doesn't jive with, with his kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And part of that, there was a section there in the memories that we skipped over where he gets the book on the collected works
of Shakespeare.
Yeah. And so that he's being taught to read, that's one of his kind of saving graces with all the, not being part of the games and stuff. He always took that as, well, I can read and the other savages can't, right? And that was the thing that he fell back on to make himself feel better about being left out of their games. But that, the words of Shakespeare, right, really, that ancient kind of English nobility and pride and those kind of ways, right, really were the real formation of how he came to those thoughts.
He also had some kind of very complicated sounding biology textbook that he could read.
Right, it was like a manual for Linda's old job, right. the hatchery, right? It's how to fertilize eggs or something.
Yeah, that
he really didn't understand.
Yeah. Those are your options growing up. Not great.
A technical manual on fertilizing an egg or Shakespeare.
Yeah. But all of this is told to Bernard. This is how it comes out. Yeah. And at the end of sort of these tales, Bernard sort of asks John if he wants to come back to society.
Yeah.
And John is very excited. Wants to bring Linda too, though. Yeah. John is reluctant at first, but then agrees.
Well, when Bernard kind of thinks about it and goes, Linda may, in his mind, he kind of thinks Linda might be really good additional leverage, right? In his little battle with the director, then Bernard is kind of, his thought goes, yeah, I need to get Linda there.
Yeah.
That's gonna be, way better than just John alone. And then once John hears that, then he's kind of all on board, right?
Yeah.
Linda gets to come. So yeah, that's the kind of the end of the chapter. And then it's on to chapter 9, where now Lenina is is going to go for a bit of a holiday.
Yeah. So, yeah, Lenina and Bernard go back to their, I can't remember what they call them, but it's basically their hotel, their rest house. And she's had such a dreadful time with the savages that she takes 6 half grams of soma.
Really hits it hard.
Which zonks you out for about 18 hours. Which is like, man, like needing to sleep 18 hours through your vacation.
Yeah, you're
not having a great time. Need a vacation from your vacation. But this works out great for Bernard, who now is able to, like...
He makes a little day trip.
Exercise his plans without having Lenina along to drag him down.
Yeah, he goes back to Santa Fe, which is kind of where the warden is, and their nice hotel, not just the rest house. And yeah, he gets on the phone. He's got some phone tag to do there to get through to the world control.
Yeah, but he does. He like gradually works his way up to the world controller, and is like, I got these people. I kind of want to bring them back. And
I wonder, because they don't explain really what the conversation is. I wonder how much he revealed about the connection to the director.
Oh,
I'm assuming not really much.
Yeah, I would.
Because he wanted to keep that as a surprise, little ace in the sleeve. But yeah, no, he gets permission from the world controller, which is the ultimate thing, right? Bernard, I don't think he has the character or the wherewithal to try and sneak these people back. So he really wants to pursue that permission, which coming right from the world controller opens up all the doors. And so he's super, super satisfied with that.
Well, I think too, to an extent, like if his plan, as you predicted, and it turns out to be true, is to on some level also use this guy to leverage against his boss who wants to send him to Iceland. You've got to sort of have all those T's crossed and I's dotted so that the boss doesn't just make
back here on him.
Right? Like, yeah, you've got to have everything in place. This is a society where everything works because everything fits in the right way.
Well, that's right.
Right. Now, while he's taking care of, then he heads over to the guy in charge of the
warden.
The warden.
Yeah.
Gives him all the paperwork. All the paperwork gets dealt with, and he's allowed to take John and Linda. While this is going on, John has become so excited at the prospect of getting back to society, or getting to society for the first place at all, he goes to the rest house.
Yeah, but it's too quiet.
It's too quiet.
It's a little worried.
He thinks he's been abandoned. He thinks he's been lied to.
He freaks out immediately and starts making really good decisions. Right?
As we all do when we freak out because we think we've been abandoned by somebody. He like trashes a window.
Yeah.
And breaks into the rest house and starts poking around through Lenina's baggage.
Yeah, just cracks the luggage open. Like no compunction there. It just opens it up and starts messing around.
And starts smelling things.
Yeah.
Draping himself in things.
And what he gets her smelling powders on him and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he discovers that Lenina is there in the other room.
Yeah.
And he goes and,
not too creepily, goes to kind of watch what she's doing. She's in her soma coma.
Nothing creepy about breaking into somebody's hotel room and watching them sleep in a soma coma and like thinking like, it's a tune.
Yeah. And this is where we kind of first see John's thoughts, I guess, around Lenina and how he starts to kind of battle these urges versus his kind of self-imposed, Shakespearean world kind of notions of morality. And yeah, this is our first blush at the battle that's going on within John.
And it is there's a battle raging inside of him between his desire for
his hormones versus his upbringing, especially on Shakespeare. Yeah.
And then I think he hears the helicopter arrive, and he's like,
sneaks out,
and encounters Bernard, who's waiting for him.
That's right.
I imagine they probably had to pay for that window. It's probably going on Bernard's credit card.
Yeah. I'm sure it was probably not very expensive, though.
No, probably not. But it's just like, you grab a bottle from the minibar, you break a window, it's going to go on your credit card.
That's right. Yeah. Trip, right? Yeah. Probably all got charged back to the hatchery.
Exactly. It was on the hatchery. Business expense. Yes.
Yeah.
Chapter 10.
So now they're back.
They're back. And Bernard is summoned to the hatchery where he works, where the director is.
The director's had enough. I'm not sure if he maybe heard some stuff about the trip or just he was pondering things while Bernard was away. But the director's had enough, and he's like, all right, I'm gonna terminate him now, or I'm gonna, kind of call him out in public, in front of all the other, alphas and betas. He picks the fertilization room because that's where all the most higher caste people are working. in greatest number to kind of publicly call out Bernard.
And that's a pretty big deal, I'd say. Yeah. Having your social standing attacked like this is really, because I guess, between the alphas and the betas and the epsilons and everything else, like that, again, is your social status. And if you're called out on wherever your social status is, it's going to, in a way, even if not technically, it's going to drop you to,
being at the lower end, so like an alpha minus, or, being viewed in that sense, or, being an alpha, Bernard is an alpha plus.
Yeah.
So, having that, social view of him already because of his appearance, right? And then being chastised in public where now people would think he's, maybe no better than a beta or something like that, would be very detrimental to his standing, which we find out is something Bernard is actually a lot more concerned about than we first thought.
Mm-hmm. He is, in fact, though, prepared for this because
he's got the aces up his sleeve.
He knew it was coming. And the first thing he does is he invites Linda to come in.
Yeah. Linda is Exhibit A.
Exhibit A.
Tip of the spear.
Reintroduced to the director.
Yeah.
This is your life. Remember this lovely woman that you abandoned?
And she plays the part well, right?
Yep.
She comes in and, oh, my Tomakin, and, she throws herself on him. And,
yep.
And because she's aged on the Savage Reservation, she hasn't had access to whatever technology keeps everyone young and thin.
She's got terrible.
So blotchy skin, fat skin. So she's kind of hideous in this world, right? So, there's already this kind of people are aghast and shocked at her appearance in general. And then she's throwing herself all over the director and, the love, my love, and, you gave me a baby. Kind of thing, and then a second shoe drops.
Yeah. And in comes John. Who he basically just comes up to the director and kneels down at him and is like, Father.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the end of the chapter.
Well, there's an interesting bit there where he kind of lets us know that in that time, right? He compared it to kind of modern cursing in a sense, right? So the mother type terminology and kind of wording was more serious. It was like saying kind of fuck or something more carnal kind of thing. Whereas the father side of that kind of dichotomy was less harsh, right? It was more like saying shit or something. Okay. It was more he said it was more scatological, the mother reference, which is why, the crowd was very put off by seeing Linda. But when John said my father, they kind of broke out into laughter because it was less aggressive, less of a kind of harsh swear, right?
Right.
In that society, which I thought was a very interesting kind of thing.
But it's also a mockery of him too. Like the head of this thing has a child with this terrible creature.
That's right.
Yep. And I think within the first couple of sentences of the next chapter, we learned that
he resigned
immediately.
Right. Well, he runs out of the room.
Right.
With his hands over his ears, not wanting to listen to the laughter and my father, and he's just like, I can't take it, and he runs out. Right. His past is finally
caught up with him.
Yeah, and really that's the last we hear of the director. He doesn't show up and anywhere else in the book. He's done. His career is over. It begs the thought as to kind of where he goes. Right. Being an alpha plus and being in that high position, but taking that shot, as we already talked about, right, to your credibility, to your status within your cast.
Yeah. No.
I'm curious what happens to him. Whether there's some stuff that we find out later in the book as to where people may go, and I'm curious if he maybe ends up that route.
Maybe it's in the sequel, Braver, Newer World.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll find out. We don't find out in this book.
So now we're at chapter 11.
Yeah, so they're now kind of, I guess, introduced into the world.
Yeah.
Linda is of no interest really, being kind of that mother type figure, being hideous. Nobody really cares about her, and she doesn't really have any interest in rejoining society. Right? She from that encounter at the center, right? She saw how people looked at her and just kind of like, she wants to check out. So she kind of sets herself up for basically a almost permanent soma holiday.
Yeah.
And the doctors are saying, well, we can't rejuvenate her. So yeah, might as well let her kind of leaving Las Vegas herself on
Right, yeah.
right. Like she's basically, they give her like however many months to live. She's gonna just wind down the clock in a peaceful.
And she had, I don't know if it mentions it in this chapter, but she ends up having some kind of rapidly worsening dementia or
Yeah, just that confusion
yeah
thing. And it does become kind of important later on. But yeah, for now, she's kind of out of the picture. So the focus of society is now on John, right? Everyone's fascinated with this savage man,
yeah
who has been now introduced to society. And this is doing wonders for Bernard.
yeah
He has now kind of shot to the top of the social standing here. He's flying high, like he's famous now. Everyone is after him. He's the guy that brought, the savage to society. Everyone's super interested in everything. And Bernard is really enjoying it. He, his previous misgivings and, his kind of thoughts of wanting to be alone or be apart from society have kind of evaporated a little bit. Like, I don't know. I kind of get the sense that Bernard does not really have any courage in his convictions here, right? He's really kind of jumped right back on the whole Brave New World bandwagon.
Yeah,
now that he has a little bit of fame.
The first time that he's really taken advantage of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's cozying up to women he doesn't know. He's taken Soma. He's the talk of the town. And a lot of this was very reminiscent to me of, and it's been years since I saw it, but the Elephant Man, where, you've got, what is considered sort of the upper class society finding this savage and all being very entertained by the savagery of it all. Like, oh, look at this strange man.
It's something new and different.
Yeah. At one point they end up watching a film where the audience is watching savages, participate in these kind of rituals that they had, like the whipping their backs with the knotted ropes, and everyone's laughing.
Yeah.
And John is there in this audience
and doesn't understand
why he's laughing at, these rituals that were super important to him. The other thing we sort of learn in this chapter is that Lenina has a bit of a thing.
Yes.
For John.
Well, there's a couple things here. So one, Helmholtz is introduced to John. So Helmholtz, Bernard's friend, meets John, right? And they are kind of fast friends. They get along really well, right? They both have, more so than Bernard ever really did, they both have that mentality where they're very kind of separate from society, and kind of, similar to how Bernard and Helmholtz first bonded. That kind of happens with John and Helmholtz. So there's an instant friendship there.
And on top of that, I don't remember it came out in an earlier chapter, but Helmholtz, it turns out he's a writer.
Yes, yeah, he works at the propaganda factory or whatever.
But in his own time, he's dabbled in his own sort of non-propaganda kind of.
Yeah,
right.
Well, I think earlier he wanted to. He has this goal of trying to write something with substance, essentially, right? So he's looking for something more that this society definitely doesn't really offer for him. And I think that brings, him and John together rather quickly. The other thing we find out is Bernard is documenting everything. As he's taking John around and touring him around, he's writing reports to the World Controller. And the World Controller is kind of reading these reports and seems to be kind of like hunting for some kind of reaction or something, that he expects to see from John about society. We don't know what that is yet, but there's definitely a real interest. The World Controller is following this very closely. I mean, ultimately, he's the one who gave the order to bring John over.
Right.
So he's very interested, which we just get a kind of a glimpse of through Bernard's report.
Right.
And his reading of those reports.
And I think I kind of missed that too. Now that I hear that is going to be important.
It is important later on. I mean, it's a bit of foreshadowing, I guess. I mean, they explain it enough later on. But yeah, so getting back to Lenina's kind of crush or obsession with John, right? She's just fascinated with John.
And there's this one section of the book I wanted to read because it struck me as really odd what he did there, because it's never done elsewhere in the book that I can recall. But this is Lenina is at work, and she's just kind of just fantasizing about John. She sighed profoundly as she refilled her syringe. John, she murmured to herself. John. Then, my Ford. She wondered, have I given this one its sleeping sickness injection or haven't I? She simply couldn't remember. In the end, she decided not to run the risk of letting it have a second dose and moved down the line to the next bottle. Next paragraph. 22 years, 8 months, and 4 days from that moment, a promising young Alpha-Minus administrator at Mwanza was to die of trypanosomiasis, the first case for over half a century. Yep. Sighing, Lenina went on with her work. And it's such a weird tangent to suddenly go on, like, this baby is going to die. 22 years from her.
Her infatuation has led to this guy's death because she can't concentrate.
It feels like a cutaway gag from like Family Guy or something.
Yeah. It was quite humorous, right? Yeah. 22 years later, this guy drops dead. Yeah, so yeah, she's got it kind of bad, John. Like she's really, and we don't really know how that's developed aside from, he's kind of famous, right? And she is part of, bringing him back, and she was part of that whole process of, introducing him to society, right? And she has a certain level of fame and notoriety because of that as well. And one of the things, she's getting asked by all the guys, like, oh, how is he in bed? Because this is common, dinner conversation, right, in this time, and she can't honestly give an answer because she hasn't been to bed with him yet. So she kind of, I think, is getting frustrated on that sense too, because she's constantly being asked, like, whoa, how's this savage lover? And she can't answer, right? So I think that helps develop the infatuation.
Yeah, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get it? It's never been a problem for him before.
Yeah.
And so they end up going, she and John go out to a feelie.
Yes, which we find out a little bit more is really like a haptic porno kind of.
It's kind of all your senses. Right?
Yeah.
Like it opens with like music,
the scent or
aroma is sort of dragging you in. And then as the film starts, you sort of grab your handles and you begin to get the sensations. It was called 3 Weeks in a Helicopter. It tells the story of a black man who kidnaps a blonde beta plus woman to just rape her for like 3 weeks or whatever it is. Which, I mean, maybe you get the feeling right in your butt. Maybe there's a third pole that you don't grip with your hands.
That's right. Yeah. But so in the movie, he, John's in the theater and he's, he grabs his haptics or whatever and you get all the sensations, which they don't really address, but like that must have been a real messy theater. Like, like you're getting all the sensations throughout the whole thing. And then at the end, her rescuers come and there's, a foursome with her and her three rescuers. And, if you're feeling all of that.
You're bringing chosen pants with you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they don't really, it's not really addressed there how messy your theater is there, but it seems like it'd be a little bit wonky. But John, he does not like it. Doesn't care for it. Doesn't sit with his kind of moral code and company.
He is, of course, much more interested in Shakespearean type stories. And again, now that I've sort of said it out loud, another reason that it could have been a black man is he's able to make that connection to Othello.
Yeah.
That's another.
Kind of obsessed with Othello a little bit, right? Yep. So that could potentially be it. But yeah, so John is not really impressed with the film. Lenina she tries to make a bit of a move, and he's kind of like, well, good night, and that's that.
Yeah, no, they love that. Like, she gets out of their little helicopter or whatever, and it's like, she's like powdering her nose and getting herself all ready, and as she turns around to like invite him in, he's like, bye.
Yeah, he's just like, I'm out. She's like, I gotta go whip myself or something, right?
What the fuck has happened? So she's still confused about, what John wants. That takes us to chapter 12.
Chapter 12 is kind of this is the downfall of Bernard, essentially, right? So there's a party.
Yeah, this is where John won't come to the party.
That's right. John's kind of like fed up with this getting paraded around bullshit, and he doesn't come out of his room for the party. I mean, there's some important people there, and, Bernard has been flying high on
the arch community songster of Canterbury.
Right. Which we find out later is akin to kind of like a cardinal in the Roman Catholic, which, that's pretty high up, right? Fairly impressive stature.
Speaking kind of that, I did want to quickly note, a couple more Ford references that I hit on. One of that came up, I think, in the first half that I didn't mention last time was the sign of the T.
Yes, the sign of the T.
Which replaced the cross, which again is brilliant because you got the Model T Ford.
That's right, yeah.
And it's so similar to a cross that in my mind, I'm seeing it almost as like the Catholic.
Easy enough to, kind of replace.
Yes.
Right, in society and still have, ancient architecture and things like that where we'll just chop off the top and sign of the T.
Boom, you're done.
That's right.
And the other one was just a quick reference to the YWFC. No, YWFC. Like the YWCA or the YMCA.
Okay.
The Young Man's or Young Woman's Christian Association, Young Women's Ford Association.
Right, yes.
And it took me a little, I actually had to.
I think I missed that one, but.
I was sure it had Ford in it, but I was like, what is this? Because I didn't know by default what the C stood for. I had to Google it. And when it came up as Christian, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, back to the party.
So yeah, things don't go well at the party when John refuses to show himself. Everyone's upset. They start talking shit about Bernard, essentially right to his face, right? I mean, he's wandering through the crowd, trying to appease everyone, and they're just, they're talking him down. The same rumors come up about the alcohol in this thing, when he was decanted and all that kind of stuff. And the arch community songster guy is, he's an important person, and he takes this as a personal affront and kind of storms out, and essentially Bernard's fame comes to an end. I mean, he's now, all the stuff that he was afraid of before all of this started about his position in society essentially comes true, right? He's worse off now than he was before because he's now had that taste of fame and glory, and now he's even lower than he was before.
Well, it's one thing to be at this level just sort of all the time and sort of have people look down their nose at you, but to go up and then come back down again, that fall is something that's different than just being there by default.
That's right. Well, now he's also more well-known, too, right? As a failure.
Right, yeah, totally. And he's, at this point getting to be kind of ticked at John's friendship with Helmholtz.
Yeah, he's jealous. He's envious, right? And yeah, they kind of, I think they go, is this where they go friends off here, or is that a bit later on?
Well, so according to SparkNotes, not a sponsor, John and Helmholtz are sort of bonding over writing right now. So
yeah,
John reads some of Shakespeare and reads some of Romeo and Juliet, which Helmholtz ends up finding it quite funny.
Yes, because he doesn't understand that romantic passion because it doesn't exist in this society.
Yeah. Specifically what it says here is that anyone would make a fuss over which man a girl should have is
it's mind-boggling. Yeah, doesn't make sense with their conditioning.
And so, as much as they have these things in common, and this might have been where Helmholtz shared his poem with John.
Yeah, well, Helmholtz was in trouble, right? I don't know that he was on suspension or something from the part of his job where he had his students
on, or maybe he was suspended from that, and that's how he ended up at the
because he read
Ganda place.
He had read something to his students, and it was like some rhyming lines about being alone.
Yeah,
just trying to kind of get a reaction out of his students, but he ended up getting suspended because they all ratted on him. He was writing stuff that was taboo, essentially. So yeah, he's definitely on this wavelength of hearing some of the Shakespeare kind of resonates for Helmholtz that John's reciting, but some of it is just doesn't jibe with his conditioning.
Chapter 13?
Yeah, that's about it for chapter 12. Chapter 13. So Lenin's still kind of pining away. She's miserable over her lack of progress, with John. She can't close the deal. So she's talking to Fanny again about it. And Fanny says, I don't understand how you're obsessed over one dude, basically. But you know what? I'm here to support you. You need to, gives her kind of the bit of the pep talk of like, give it the old college try. Go try and fuck him, you know.
Yeah. Suck back some soba. That's it. Get your nerves calm. Everything will be fine.
And don't take no for an answer.
Don't take it.
Just go get him.
Unfortunately, wasn't it more than no is the answer.
Yeah.
So yeah, she heads over to see John. He doesn't seem pleased to see her.
Well, he's shocked, right?
Yeah. But also, like, he's got all his feelings that he's struggling with.
Yeah.
And so he falls down to his knees, begins reciting Shakespeare to her, declares his love for her.
Which she essentially reciprocates, but in her way.
Right.
Right. So this is kind of, I think, confusing for him.
Yeah.
Because he has this sense of what love should be, right, from Shakespeare. And she has no sense of love. She just has this sense of, well, I want to get with this guy because he's strange and fascinating, right? And by all means, I should be able to take him to bed. So it presents this situation where they're both on different pages.
They're both in different books.
Yeah, different books.
In different language.
But now shit's about to go down because she thinks it's on, and he's kind of like, you know, wanting to go through courtship and, you know, all this kind of other stuff. And she's kind of ready to go.
Yeah, so she starts just taking her clothes off.
Yeah.
Which is quite a shock to him. And at a certain point, I think after she's taken everything off, he just freaks out.
Yeah, like it's a shock to his sensibility that a woman would behave that way.
Yeah.
Because it's not anything he's ever seen. With maybe not the exception of Linda, I guess, in a sense, but he didn't really see that.
But, and maybe even then, that's part of where this comes from, is his, you know, he felt abandoned by Linda to some extent every time that happened, right? He was left alone in this little room. And that's, I think, maybe blocked off a part of that sexual side of things for him. Because I think the normal response to this would just be like, oh my, please, I'm not... That's not what we get. We get him hollering strumpet and
impudent strumpets. Yes, that's the line of the book, right?
Yeah,
he really hammers down on impudent strumpet.
Freaks out. She has to run and hide in the bathroom.
Yeah. Well, he actually physically pushes her, right? Like it becomes a confrontation. He's so affronted by her promiscuity, essentially. Right, that it destroys the image he had in his head of her, right, and that's where he attacks her.
And you know, I'm going to suggest that had he ejaculated a little bit more, maybe that wouldn't be a problem. Maybe all that
he could have maybe played it cool. Yeah,
that would be all that built up tension that he just didn't know what to do with.
That's right.
Masturbation's good for you, John. And then so she's hiding in the bathroom. He's continuing to rant about strumpets and the harlots.
Like pacing around the room, muttering to himself, like, you know, from her perspective, thinking he's had like a psychotic break, essentially, right?
That's just like, can you pass me my clothes?
Yeah. Because, well, he asked her to leave or something, right? And she's like, you know, can you pass me my clothes, honey?
And then so I say, oh, I can't get through the door. He's like, well, it's just past the window above the door. So and he gets the clothes, and it's like, Can you pass me my belt?
Yeah.
Just let this poor...
And the whole time, like, he hasn't calmed down that much.
No.
He's still pretty in a rage. And so she's getting dressed and she's still wondering, like, how the heck am I going to get out of here? And then we get a little bit of a Saved by the Bell situation. He gets the phone call.
Phone rings. Lenina can scamper away.
Well, yeah. So the phone call is Linda is not well.
Yeah.
She's been
dying. She's on her...
to find the hospice care or, you know, the hospital for the dying. So he runs out the door and, you know, Lenina waits a good while and then gets to sneak out, and he's off to go visit Linda in the death hospital
for
chapter 14.
The last time, pretty much.
Yeah, definitely the last time because this is her final day.
Yep. And I think this is where we first learn about death conditioning.
Mm.
Which is really...
It's implied at one point earlier in the book, right, that it's, you know, when they fly over the crematorium.
Oh, baby.
Not that big of a deal.
Right.
It's just part of society.
But they never really talked about how they accomplish that, which is like when children are at a certain age, they're basically allowed to just hang out.
Yeah, it's like an amusement park, essentially, right? The kids come in and get to like, oh, look at this one, and they just run around. They crawl over the dying people and like, like little kids just running amok in the hospital. But the way around Linda, he doesn't take it well.
No, because again, like he's coming from a society where death is sort of it's more important. It's more important. The dying are meant to be sort of die with dignity. Let them have their silence. Let the family grieve. Grieving isn't something that happens in Brave New World.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense
to grieve. Right? This conditioning is that death is no big deal, right? We are the society as a whole, right? The parts of the whole are not important. But yeah, John really has some trouble here as well, in the sense that his communication with Linda, right, when he finally kind of gets through to her, she doesn't recognize him, all right, and that kind of angers him. She when she first sees him, she calls him Pape, right, which kind of infuriates him a little bit more.
Nice.
And then he actually kind of grabs her and shakes her, and for a minute she's like, "Oh, John," and but then because he's kind of shaking her about, that's about it. She kind of stops breathing, and it's all done for Linda at that point. And then he's in his grief and despair at what he's done and the loss of his mother. And he still has all these little kids running around.
He's like yelling at them and knocking them over and freaking out at the nurses. And, oh my God, I killed my mother. I killed Linda.
So anyway, they're kind of, they don't really want him there, and he doesn't want to be there. So he runs out, and that's where we now get to the real last kind of moment of the book, the last turning point. He's leaving the hospital, kind of coming out to, I don't know, kind of some back area, I think. And he just kind of is lost in his grief, and he's kind of bumping through this crowd. And it's a crowd of Deltas, and he kind of eventually looks at them all. And, his thing where he really hates the whole twin thing and how everyone's identical, and it's really just like, the same person repeated. He kind of looks up, and he's in a pack of Deltas, and he just kind of freaks out a little bit because he can't handle it.
Yeah, there's only out of all these people, there's only two different faces.
That's right. Yeah. And so kind of, he's, first of all, he's dealing with his grief. Second of all, they start doing their soma distribution at the end of the workday for all these Deltas. So they're lining up for their happy drug.
Yeah.
And he's just freaking out. So he kind of goes a bit nuts.
He starts fucking throwing the soma out the window. That's right. I think down to like a lower level. Telling them like they need to stop taking it. It's not good for you.
He suddenly starts to kind of start a revolution almost with these
one man
who are like, "What are you doing?"
No one's joining him on this revolution. It's just him.
It's just him. He's trying to start this movement, and they're all like, "What are you doing to our drugs?" And so, it's not going well. The crowd's getting riled up.
So Bernard and Helmholtz get a phone call.
Yeah.
And they rush to the hospital.
They kind of get there just in time as things really start to overheat.
Just in time. Well, they probably would have gotten caught up in it anyway, just because of their association with John, but just in time for them to also be like, well, Helmholtz gets in on it.
Yeah. So
fuck yeah.
This is another kind of point at the character of Bernard, right? So Helmholtz immediately is sees what's happening, rushes into the fray, is like, yeah, it's going down. I'm going to support my friend, right? Let's have a good old fashioned brawl. And Bernard is just kind of paralyzed with indecision. He's like, should I help them? That'd be against the law, or he wouldn't, I might get hurt, but they're my friends. And so he's just kind of, can't really make a decision, right? He kind of, in one sense, wants to help, but he's such a mousy character that doesn't have really much conviction, that he's just kind of waffles until the police show up. And they have some cool gadgets. The police.
What did they have?
They have water pistols full of anesthetic.
That's right.
They
were actually called water pistols.
Yeah. And they have kind of like a fog machine.
Cops, I remember, with super soakers.
That's right. Yeah. They got the fog machine that essentially is like a cloud of soma.
Yeah.
And they have this recording similar to the orgy porgy kind of ceremony, right? Where it's just a guy with a soothing voice that they put on loudspeaker trying to calm everyone down. Like, hey, you guys are all friends, that kind of thing. And so they kind of subdue the crowd, sort everyone out, get them on their way. They arrest Helmholtz and John for fighting, and Bernard is kind of trying to slip out the back door.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, hey, you're friends with these guys, right? And he thinks about denying it, but he's like, no, I can't. So he's like, yeah, they're my friends. And so they take him to they're all kind of taken up by the police. And now we kind of get into the denouement of the book.
Yeah,
last 3 chapters.
This is the major exposition chapter.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way the world works chapter.
Yeah.
And one thing I'm going to mention here, because I don't know if it happened before now or if it happens later than now, because I didn't make a note of it. But at a certain point in the book, they stop referring to John as John. He just becomes the Savage.
Or Mr. Savage.
Or Mr. Savage.
You know, Mr. Savage was my father, but
yeah. Well, I think Mr. Savage is what others might call him.
Yeah.
But even
it's a weird term of respect.
The text of the book, like just the narration of the book, stops referring to him as John.
Aside from the world controller, who still calls him Mr. Watson.
Okay.
Yeah. But yes, everyone else.
I'm not just thinking about the people. I'm just thinking about the narrator, the author.
Yeah.
The text of the book.
That's right.
When
you see John way less.
Yeah. And it's a transition. There's a period where it's sometimes John and sometimes the Savage. And then I know at least the last 2 chapters were nothing but the Savage.
Yeah. Well, and the final chapter, you know, he loses his friends essentially, right? So we'll get into that. And yes, then he is just the Savage.
But yeah, so this is where we kind of learn how society works.
Yeah, this is, you know, I kind of took this chapter as the kind of behind the curtain moment. Mm. So the 3, you know, amigos that got arrested at the factory there, or at the hospital, they get essentially brought to the principal's office, right? They're shown to the world controller study. And now we get a glimpse of, you know, what's really, you know, kind of driving the world and how things really work. Because we get to peer behind Mustafa Aman's world, right? And kind of what's been happening and what he knows versus what everyone else knows.
And I think it's worth noting before talking about the specifics of the world is how Mustafa Aman came to be here. Because he was very much like Helmholtz.
More so in a sense.
More so. Yeah. Except about science.
Yes.
He was all science, all science, all science, to the point where he pursued it too far to the potential detriment of society. And much like, you know, our 3 amigos are about to experience, he was told, well, we can either send you to an island or you can shut the fuck up and we'll like fast track you to a...
Yeah, they put him in some kind of world controllers conference or something like that, right? Kind of like management training program for world controllers. Yeah, and that was his decision, right? That now these guys don't really get a decision per se, but we do find out that there's other options for people that don't necessarily fit into the world. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that we find out in this chapter about the inner workings of how they kind of set up this world. We find about some experiments that they've kind of done.
Yeah, because it's not like they just hit this point and then they've stayed there. Yeah. They've dabbled with other things, and some of the ones I remember were like they tried making a society of just alphas.
Yeah,
which didn't work because, you know, the alphas didn't want to do the epsilon work.
That's right.
And so they did fight each other about who did that. But they also talk about how like the lower caste, like the epsilons, for example, they work like 7.5 hours a day, but they don't have to. There's not actually that much work to do. And so they did an experiment to see like what would happen if they only worked 4 hours a day.
That's right.
Well, the extra free time didn't lead to any more happiness. They just like fucking gobbled soma and were miserable. Like
they were less happy.
They were less free time every time.
Yeah. Which I think, you know, that's one of the things that the theme starts to emerge here of the cost of happiness, right? I mean, they mention it very clearly in here, right? That happiness has to be paid for. And the cost here, right, is, you know, losing some of your humanity or your art or that kind of thing, your freedom, right? And so giving people too much freedom, right, allows them to be miserable because now they're kind of reminded a little bit about how little, you know, kind of soul or, you know, importance they have in the world. So yeah, it's very interesting, the experiments that he talks about that they conducted with society, because it really does point to how you really do have to have that trade-off working very well in order for things to function.
Yeah.
Right. You really do have to have kind of a soulless kind of populace, right? They have to have that right balance of, you know, work and drugs and sex and, you know, all these kind of things to be, you know, operate on this very risk-free level. Everything requires very little effort, right? Every problem has been taken away, right? So you're happy or contented potentially, but there's no ups and downs. There's no great strife or passion or anything like that within society anymore, right? So essentially, everyone is kind of a bit of a soulless robot, right? They're happy and content, right? But there's no passion in the world anymore.
And so they've had to remove all art, basically, all art, all literature. Shakespeare's forbidden. Religion.
Yes.
Was that for the religion?
Ford is kind of a surrogate for religion in a sense.
Yeah, and it's a kind of a state-controlled religion that allows them to filter the information.
But as far as a belief in God, right, and that aspect of religion, that's very much removed. Ford is seen as more of a founder, and someone who had the right ideas rather than a deity. Whereas, all aspects of kind of God and religion have been removed so that people have, nothing to rile them up in a sense, right? We've seen how Christianity has, come and gone with crusades and things like that, right? People can get very passionate about religion.
Yes, they can.
So it's another thing that needs to be removed from this society so they can function perfectly.
And Mustafa even admits that science is something that has to be curbed to a certain extent as well.
That's right, yeah.
That even too much science can be bad.
Yeah, anything that threatens any science, right, that threatens the natural order of things, any change could potentially be catastrophic because things are so balanced.
Yes.
Right?
So you can't be pursuing, scientific discoveries in a direction that might unbalance society, which shocks Helmholtz when that comes up, because I thought, science was one of our most important things.
Yeah.
Mustafa has to explain, well, it's within reason.
That's right. To a certain extent, you can pursue science, but if you do any real science, that could upset the balance. He even mentioned something about how they have, 10,000 patents on, inventions and things, right, that could potentially improve society, but they're not going to work with how things.
And then that person probably gets shipped to an island.
That's right. Yeah. Well, yeah, and
remember any other specifics from looking back on society, or?
I think it kind of starts out with, Mustafa asks John if he likes society, and he says no, and Helmholtz and Bernard are a bit shocked at that. He says that there's nice things and that kind of thing, but it's there's not much to it essentially, right? And they kind of first talk a little bit about, some of the feelies and music, and John says they're kind of empty or meaningless, right? And Mustafa's explanation is that you can't make tragedies without social instability, right? You need these inequalities within society, right? So that you can fight the good fight, or, be passionate, or, star-crossed lovers, that kind of stuff. None of that really has the possibility of existing in this society.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they can't have any art, that's meaningful, because it doesn't make sense. Have to maintain that balance. And that's the price they have to pay for stability. It's all this trade-off of, if we give up all the, the high art and the passion and that kind of thing, then we have stability, happiness, contentedness, human automaton kind of society. I have a little quote here about that I thought was kind of neat. So this is the world controller explaining things to John a little bit. So he says, actual happiness looks pretty squalid in comparison with the overcompensations for misery. And of course, stability isn't nearly so spectacular as instability. And being contented has none of the glamour of a good fight against misfortune, none of the picturesqueness of a struggle with temptation, or a fatal overthrow by passion or doubt. Happiness is never grand, right? And that's the crux of that society, is there is no craziness, right? Everything is very stable and calm and even keeled. And, all of those swings of temptation and passion and love and things like that, essentially lead to sorrow and real happiness, right, have been removed.
It's also, they use the word infantile a lot to describe the kind of society they're in and the kind of experiences that they have, that they're very base.
Yeah.
It's about immediate sort of gratification of your senses, soma,
You never
sexual intercourse, good food or, whatever. And you're designed from the bottle to mesh with your status in life. But you're still ultimately designed to just sort of focus on those various sort of base desires and the more complex desires that can lead to, art and creativity, and
they have to be eliminated. Yeah. Because again, the whole purpose of this world is to keep people keeping the wheels turning, right? They need them to be consuming. They need them to be, happy and content to kind of keep the machine running without questioning things. And then, there's another.
But then it makes you question, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
We've created a society that exists just to keep the machine running. Why do we keep the machine running? Because we need to keep the machine running.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that I think within this chapter is that they point to as to the why. So we talk about the 9 Years' War, right? So it's mentioned briefly earlier in the book, and now we find out a little bit more about it. The 9 Years' War was this terrible war where, there's anthrax and chemical weapons and people dying all over the world. And, it's implied, it's not explicit within the book, but it's implied that the war was so terrible that people were willing to do almost anything to stop that war, right? And so that is essentially, I think, given as the crux or the answer of, why would they do this, right? Why would they become this kind of soulless society without passion or purpose? Why just a machine running for its own sake?
Mm-hmm.
Because the alternative was terrible, terrible war without end.
Well, and this would have been written after World War I.
Yes, it was after World War I, but before World War II.
Yes.
Right. And I think, even in the 30s, there was probably still a little bit of, rumor and that kind of stuff that, there's still trouble brewing in Europe. Right. So, that I think was on people's mind that there could be yet another great war.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very interesting as the why, right? Because, as much as we've, kind of seen that this society doesn't have a soul or, much humanity to it anymore. Yeah, that was never really kind of asked or answered until this point as to why would they go down this route, right? I mean, we got a little bit of economic collapse and war, but now we find out a little bit more that it was so bad that people were willing to sacrifice, all that they had, right? In terms of, passion and, kind of happiness and sorrow and joy, just to escape that war. So that's kind of that kind of answer, which, is now this kind of theme of happiness has to be paid for,
mm-hmm.
right? And what's the cost? We find it's pretty significant in terms of what they've lost, right? But there is an out, right? We find out about the island.
Yeah, and I thought that was because, when the island first came up, when, it's first sort of hinted that Bernard might be sent to Iceland, it's this terrible thing. And that was my reaction to it. Like, I don't want to get sent to Iceland. But Mustafa manages to explain it in a way that makes it kind of appealing, which is that,
although Bernard doesn't see that, he freaks out.
Bernard like fucking takes off. I'm going to my room.
His character here takes another hit, right? Like he's on his knees begging, "Don't send me to the island." Like, it's just not a good look.
I don't think he stays long enough to hear about the benefit of the island.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah,
because he actually gets taken away. They drug him and take him out of the room, put him to bed.
But the way it's explained to Helmholtz is like, you're going to go and basically hang out with others like you, others that couldn't mesh with society, the ones who want to pursue these things that are forbidden here.
And Helmholtz is into it.
Helmholtz is into it. He's like,
yeah,
you know what? I'd like to go someplace with like fucky weather.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want the good life.
Storms. I think they could write well in someplace with really weird weather.
Yeah, and he already has a tortured artist mentality.
And Mustafa's like, you got the right idea, man.
He's like, you get it, Helm.
I get it. I get it too. Like I can see in that situation, it's the best of the options.
And I know there's a follow-up book called The Island as well.
Is it actually a follow-up? And
I'm not sure if it's, the same characters, but he did write a book called The Island. So I'm wondering, because we don't see too much more or hear much more about the island within this.
Or these, or Helmholtz, or...
Yeah, so we don't really know their fate. But, Bernard is, going to essentially get what he wants, in a sense, even though he doesn't realize it. And Helmholtz he's all for it. He wants this, right? He's been lost in this society for a long time, and this, for him, is just like winning the lottery. I found it interesting, though, that there is one point where he says, if the world didn't have so many islands, we would probably just kill you guys. But luckily, there's a bunch of islands that we can ship you off to when you don't fit into the rest of society, right? So it's kind of
again, like, as bad as society got, it wouldn't be surprising to see them just be like, well, I guess we got to kill you now. Yeah. In a way, it's nice that option is there. There's still a glimmer of something.
Well, and the other
society
thing too is, they're not allowed to practice science and art and that kind of stuff, within the regular Brave New World kind of society. But you got to think that these islands might be where a lot of that is happening in terms of art and science and, where do they get any progress from, right? They're certainly not allowed to really work on it, in the main society, right? So these little offshoots might provide some value in the sense that they're continuing to progress.
The realm of science, I could see that, being monitored and going, okay, that's an advancement we could maybe take and modify.
Even art, though, perhaps, right? In the sense of how did they get scent organs and feely things, and, how did the stadiums come faster? Right? Who's inventing new sports, right? You probably not guys in the main society.
But again, though, I think if you hit somebody who you felt had that kind of potential, you would give them the same kind of choice that Mustafa had, right? Mm-hmm. Do you want to go to an island and be free, or would you like to stay and invent expensive sports for us? Mm-hmm. Do you want to go to the island and write great literature, or do you want to stay here and write some pornographic feelies for us?
Yeah, I think that option's probably there. But I think given how Helmholtz took it, I think it'd be kind of soul-crushing for anyone who didn't kind of go to an island of their peers, right?
Maybe. Because Mustafa made the choice to stay.
He did, but we find out that he kind of, personally paid a great cost to do that, right? It was his atonement for his kind of sins of pursuing science too much that he chose to stay and have essentially no chance at happiness himself, but manage other people's happiness. That's the price he paid, right? So yeah, the fact that they get to go off to this island is actually, it's a reward, right? They actually kind of win the lottery in a sense where, they don't get killed. They get out of the kind of oppressiveness or, the society that they don't have a place in.
Yeah.
And they get to go off to their peers, right? So that's kind of an interesting thing to find out that that option is there.
So chapter 17?
Yeah, so this is a more conversation between
Todd and Mustafa.
Yeah. And so this is where they explain a lot more of why there's not really a religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
They talk a lot about, how man would naturally that out.
And
right?
I disagree with that.
Yeah, me too.
I really disagree.
Man would naturally turn to God.
And I think that's definitely the loudest that I've heard 1932 in this book.
Yeah.
But maybe, I
think it was maybe also catering to the audience that would be reading this book as well, to throw that in that, yes, of course, without a doubt, man would naturally turn to God, left to his own devices. That was most likely a prevalent thought during those times. And, espousing something outside of that, given all the other crazy stuff happening in the book and the society, may have been a step too far at the time if he really wanted to sell the book.
Maybe.
I think there could have been some consideration in that.
Maybe.
But yeah, essentially, right, we find out another kind of component here. The VPS that had been mentioned earlier in the book and had not really been explained, we find out is called the violent passion surrogate.
Yeah.
Right. So this is another, not a drug per se, but something that they take to stimulate the adrenal glands, right? Basically, this world that is so kind of bland or so, at one even timber for everyone's lives, is not in apparently not naturally conducive to kind of your health as a person. And you need to have this kind of replacement for violent surges of passion, within the human body. And so this is their workaround, is rather than having a society where there's instability and things for people to get upset about or passionate about, or, causes to believe in, or, things like that, we'll give them the chemical alternative.
It's kind of an opposite of a spa day.
Yeah.
You don't go away to a retreat to relax. You go away to get your adrenaline all fired up.
That's right. Yeah. As a workaround to keeping, people's mental health, this kind of thing was invented. So, and then at the end of this chapter, John kind of claims the right to, to not be happy, to have things his way. He wants art and passion and, hard times and good times and all that kind of stuff, right? And we find out that he's not allowed to go to the others, right? He's still kind of an experiment, the world controller. So he is going to kind of have to put up with society for, some indefinite amount of time.
Or does
he?
Because in chapter 18, he just fucks off.
Mm-hmm. So for me, this was a bit of it didn't track necessarily, right? That the world controller wanted him to still be part of this, experiment of living with society, but still somehow he was allowed to go off to some uninhabited kind of lighthouse to live out his days, right? It doesn't seem like that's going to really give the world controller much kind of data around this experiment. But we do find that his solitude doesn't last all that long.
Yeah, and I've sort of got like two thoughts about that. And my first thought is maybe nobody was expecting him to just bolt. Because basically it sounds like he just sort of one day went and bought all the supplies he needed and just took off into the wilderness.
Yeah.
Found a nice place to hang out for a while. But then other things happened. Or just letting him do whatever was part of the continued experiment.
Just to see how.
We don't know if he was continued to be monitored, because this last chapter is entirely from John's perspective.
Yeah.
So it could just be a matter of how does this guy react to continued involvement in this society? Does he integrate with it? Does he abandon it? What happens when he abandons it?
Yeah, I can see that.
And what ends up happening is, he wants to just sort of live this quiet life out kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, kind of more a penitent life, though. I mean, he's kind of...
Yeah, he's back to whipping himself.
Yeah, he's trying to punish himself a little bit, right? He doesn't feel like, he feels like he's kind of messed up, and he needs to atone a little bit, whether it's for his attack on Lenina or his impure thoughts or, whatever he's been struggling with, essentially, right, in terms of coming to terms with, not fitting in the savage reservation, not fitting in this society. He's trying to be hard on himself. And so he's, that's partly the reason for his isolation. He also, he hates all the twins, and, he can't really just be out in society and looking at all these people all the time. He kind of throws up whenever he sees too many people that look identical to each other. So he kind of needs solitude for that reason. But yeah, so he's kind of living this simple life, and kind of self-punishing life. He's got plans to plant his own garden and hunt game, and so he creates his own bow and arrow, and he kind of gets back into the swing of things of more his old life, and he's singing to himself one day as he's kind of whittling his bow, and he kind of catches himself singing, and that's bad, because now it seems he's happy and having a good time, and that's not the point of this little
exercise efficient penance if you're singing.
So he's caught himself kind of being a little bit happy as he's whittling away on his bow, and that kind of sets him off a little bit.
Yes.
Not really happy with that. So he kind of, gets out the old knotted cord, right, and starts flailing himself a little bit.
And as he's doing that, there's some people passing by.
Yeah, just... I guess, he's isolated, but he is within proximity of a little village.
Yeah, I think they described that there was a little village nearby that
he only had 2 flies, something, right? Yeah. So it was tiny, in comparison.
One thing I thought was interesting in this chapter, I don't know if it happened before, but they described the city in regards to the number of stories it was.
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't sprawl out. The cities in this world sprawl up.
Yeah.
Because it was like a 7-story tall city, I think.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really inventive way of describing kind of futuristic cities.
And comparatively to how you would imagine London, and I think they talk a little bit about some of the buildings being 60 or 70 stories earlier in the book, right? Like, we go, okay, this is actually quite a small little place.
Yes.
Right? But yeah, very interesting in the sense that they don't do much with nature in this society, right? There's not vast stretches of, agricultural land or anything like that. So really they could sprawl if they needed to, but they've chosen to, I think, structure their society in a certain way. And so they're efficient in their construction and how they live, right? Everyone lives in apartments, big buildings. And
it does technically allow John the freedom to go and like find a little corner of the wilderness where he can hang out. But he gets spotted.
Yeah, they see him whipping himself, right? Which is something that is shocking in this society, right? Self-flagellation, like self-punishment. It's almost unheard of, right? Why would you do that? Would you take soma or, do something else to alleviate your problems, right? So
word about John and his self-flagellation get out, and the media comes, of course.
Oh, man. Media gets involved.
Media gets involved. The fucking paparazzi's here.
Yeah, literally, the guy with the weird TV.
That was so cool. Yeah. He like gets a bundle microphone that fucking
the microphone pops. It's not like a top hat essentially that carries all the broadcasting equipment. A microphone pop.
It's got files. I want one of those, right? My portable podcasting hat.
This is the one thing in the book that we should actually try and work on.
We need a top hat with full recordings and like headphones so you can monitor yourself. It was amazing.
Yeah. And instant broadcast. Like
an antenna pops.
He's streaming it right back to
from New York. It's savage. And he doesn't really dig that.
No, not liking this intrusion on his private little life.
No.
He literally kicks the guy's ass.
Yes.
Literally kicks him square in the ass. So he's got, kind of a sore ass. But the word gets out.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he does not kind of get peace in some.
No, next he is, he doesn't actually encounter them, but it was a big game photographer.
Yeah, like kind of like a Natural Geographic type guy.
Yeah, but it was clearly built around like the concept of a big game hunter.
Yeah.
It's just he doesn't shoot these people, he films them. Yeah. And he films a feelie of John.
Yeah, well, John, meanwhile, he was upset with himself for singing, and kind of, whipped himself. And then one day, I think he was gardening is what he was doing. And he had an impure thought about Lennon.
Right.
And that set him off much worse than just the fact that he was happy. Right. Again, impudence trumpet, and he flies into a rage. And so he just, not like before where he kind of calmly started whipping himself, doing it more in a kind of penance type way. Now he's upset with himself.
Yeah.
He's literally so angry at himself for having these impure thoughts that he can't do anything else. He runs back, gets his rope, is outside in plain view, whipping himself. And the big game hunter guy is just like, oh yes, this is just, taking it all in. Captures everything, right? And makes it into a feelie that didn't even need a guy to write it.
Yeah. And it gets big.
It blows up.
It's
probably the biggest blockbuster,
right,
of all time in this Brave New World. And this brings the crowd.
Everybody wants to check out the Savage. And I don't know for sure, but Henry shows up.
Henry and Lennon.
Well, Lennon is not named, and this is why I'm saying I'm not sure.
It's Lennon,
but I'm convinced that it's Lennon.
I think there's enough clues around how she sheds tears for John.
Yeah.
And reaches out.
And the fact that she's there with Henry, which is another one of the characters that she'd gone out with before.
Yeah, because all the crowds kind of show up, and he's, he doesn't like, and he's threatening them with the whip, but they land their helicopter, and he's kind of like, he stops, right? So obviously, it points to being Lenina, because I don't think anyone else would have kind of taken his attention, distracted him in that way. And things don't go well.
No, it turns into just a fucking bonkers.
So they don't really explain exactly what happens, but essentially John sees Lenina, right?
Yeah.
And he's not happy about it.
No.
He does not take it the right way. He has essentially made up his mind on Lenina that she is, this strumpet, this woman who is beneath him or doesn't fit in with his, kind of Shakespearean morality. And he's already in a kind of rage with this crowd surrounding his lighthouse when he sees her and she's kind of, trying to connect with him again. He flies into a rage. He's got the whip already in his hand and he takes a run at her and starts kind of beating her and beating himself.
Yep.
He's got
one for me, one for you.
And the crowd gets into it. They're already raw.
The crowd is an orgy.
Well, they start out with kill it.
Yes.
Right. So they got the mob mentality already. That's already present in this society. So it doesn't take much, I think, to kind of get them going. And they're kill it. They want to see this bloodbath. They're fascinated because they don't see kind of pain or torture or this kind of stuff very often, right? It's very new to them.
Yeah.
And they're into it, right? This is a new sensation. Oh my God. And so they're kill it, feel that. And then there's that one guy who I kind of imagine as, like that guy in the Rob Schneider movies is like, you can do it. Like, like that's how I imagine it. Some guy just like, orgy porgy, shouts it out while they're all chanting. And then they're kind of like, orgy porgy. Yeah.
It becomes this huge orgy of violence and mayhem. And, most of them are probably high on soma. And
now, as I said, they don't really explain what exactly happens, but I think it's kind of alluded to that John engages in quite a few things besides violence in the night, right? He wakes up in kind of a soma daze a little bit the next day. And he, essentially we see him in his mind remember what he did. We don't know what he did, but he goes, oh God, oh God, oh God. Like, what have I done? Whether he was in the orgy or maybe he killed Lennon, we don't really know what happened, but definitely not what he wanted to do. And certainly a whole bunch of things against his kind of moral code. And this is where we get to the end of the book.
Yep.
He
learns how to levitate.
Yeah. So he is really upset with, kind of what happened or whatever he did. Or, maybe he did a whole bunch of different things. But, so it's the next night and the crowds are coming again to get in on the orgy or whatever. The word is spread again. I think they say there's a line of helicopters 10 kilometers long showing up. And the first people get there.
Where is he?
He's not around. They open the door and they see some feet kind of hanging.
Just dangling
in the
doorway.
Yeah. So he's hung himself.
Yep.
He couldn't put up with his own breaches of morality. He couldn't put up with, this society and the soullessness and the loss of everything that, it was human and passionate and that kind of stuff. And combined with his own, I think, grief about Linda, about his own actions, he ended it. And so we have a conclusion to the Mustafa Mond experiment. Feet dangling in the door.
And ironically, you could say that if not for his desire for those passions and for the ups and downs and for art and for Shakespeare, he never would have killed himself, right? Because it's only from having those severe ups to the severe downs that you get to that severe down that makes you hang yourself.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, his was a very internal world of passion, right? Like reading Shakespeare and having that kind of somewhat conditioning of the new society from Linda, but growing up in that savage world where, they had religion and morality in some sense, right? And, more akin to our world, that really he internalized that and really created his own code, right? And that ultimately was, when he was confronted with this new society, was something that he could not bear to be that out of sync, right? Where, his set of values and this kind of vapid, soulless society just did not jive.
Yeah.
Right? And the fact that he couldn't get away from them, right? He knew now, especially after that night. And then, I'm not sure if he saw all the helicopters coming or what have you, right? But, I think there was that sense of he can't get away from it. right? He tried to isolate himself. They followed him, right? Like he
couldn't escape.
He couldn't escape, right? And so I think that's part of, why he made the decision to end his life, because, he can't go to the island. He tries to live in solitude. He can't get away. The reporters show up. They know all about, his whipping himself and his kind of internal thoughts almost, in a sense, right? And he just can't escape it.
And again, in a way, he damned himself by desiring to get back to society. He would have been fine if he had been left alone at the reservation.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been maybe not a super happy life, right? But, he would have been able
to Shakespeare
experience, the unhappiness. He would have had a society that makes sense, right? Even though he was partially excluded from it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the ending that I was expecting. The book seems to, I think, not really have a main character per se, but ultimately we focus in on Mr. Savage, on John, right? That's where we end with him hanging himself.
Yeah,
and we didn't really even meet John until chapter 6,
practically. Yeah, it is interesting because we said at the last episode that we didn't encounter our main characters until chapter 3, and then it turns out they probably weren't the main characters. And actually, for a while, until the last chapter, I didn't think Lenina was coming back. She just sort of had her,
she had her shot.
She had a shot, and then she just faded away. And it was interesting how it went from sort of one character to another, to another, to another. And I think, like we talked about this before we started recording, but if I had to pick a main character, I would say it was the society. Whatever that means.
The Brave New World.
The Brave New World.
That is the main character.
That's the title.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. That's what he did there. What do you reckon as far as do you want to rate the book on a scale of 1 through 10, 1 to 5, 1 through 100? What's your preferred ranking scale?
Usually I think it's more of a 1 through 5. I think in general it was very expository at the end, right? And we really did kind of wait a long time to get kind of the payoff, of this utopian dystopian world. I think I'm probably going to sit it in more of that 3 out of 5 Cologne taps, or 3 out of 5 Feely movies, or something like that. I think ultimately I was quite disappointed with the character of Bernard, right? Especially in the earlier part of the book, my hope was that he would kind of have that a bit of awakening and, rise up to the challenge of how do I, get out of this society. And, and then we kind of got a bit of that through Helmholtz, who wasn't really
a very big
of a character, and then the book shifts focus to the Savage and how he deals with the society. And, just kind of was a little bit all over the place. I thought really done a good job as far as wrapping up the essence of the world in terms of that price for happiness kind of dialogue.
Yeah,
that they have.
That chapter I really enjoyed.
Yeah. It kind of painted the picture and cleared up a lot of stuff within the book, kind of that outside looking in kind of.
How did we get here? Yeah.
So that was really neat. But yeah, ultimately I think, just the kind of lack of focus on any one character, right? The lack of satisfaction as far as a real either victory of escape, right? I know suicide in this sense is kind of John's escape, but it's not a real escape or a real victorious escape. Right,
it does feel kind of Shakespearean though.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, it's been alluded to all through, yeah. But I think for me, it was, maybe a bit messier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it was definitely messy. I agree, around 3 out of 5, 3.5 out of 5. The other thing I would mention is I thought, and not to say it's badly written, but, and this is the only thing I've read by Aldous Huxley, but his structure, or his way of writing in this book is weirdly
inconsistent,
chunky.
Okay.
He has a lot of breaks in his sentences. If it's just text with no dialogue, it'll be a lot of commas and a lot of, asides in the middle of a single sentence.
I find that tough to fault because I do that myself. Really? So, but I get what you mean about
even within the dialogue, there's times where it's he'll, instead of saying da 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 da, he said, and that's the end of the sentence, it's da 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 da, he said, da 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 da. And even the weirdest one was you had a quote and it was something like, this isn't a quote from the book. This is just me giving an example of what it's like. But like, I'm going to go for lunch. Period. I think I'll have, comma, quote, he said after a few moments, comma, quote, a ham sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, as a writer, if it's a sometime later, it should not be included in the same set of quotes as the previous sentence. It should now be it should be a new sentence, a new quote that either opens with or ends with. He thought sometime later.
Yeah,
Said sometime later.
There's several instances of that in the book.
And it's just, maybe it's the difference in the way things were written in the 30s.
I mean, I feel like what I was saying earlier, right, about him kind of being a little inconsistent is that, and again, I'm not sure comparatively to some other kind of contemporary novels at the time, but it seemed like he was experimenting with a lot of different form here, right? Chapter 3, where we had the crazy four-way conversation, where it switches back and forth, and some of the structures of the narrative seem to change from chapter to chapter, right? So some of the form that he uses, like you were mentioning, in terms of that kind of midway continuation kind of thing, it definitely seemed kind of experimental in a sense, right? I mean, the chapter where he goes to the solidarity ceremony or whatever, and like that's a whole, the drumming and rhythms, and like, when we see these religious ceremonies, they're written in a totally different way.
And it might be that he was, he found or is trying to find a way to describe a brave new world using a brave new
different formats, things that people hadn't maybe really done before, for sure. Yeah, but it does, I think, make it a little more challenging, right, to have the form shift several times throughout the book.
It's interesting. It stood out to me, and I think in the way that like good movie editing should never be noticeable. Good writing should never be noticeable. You don't notice until you reflect on it afterwards and go like, wow, that was really good. So yeah, that's my one kind of thought about it.
For sure. Well, yeah, I agree. I think we should maybe get back into that for the wrap up. But yeah, I mean, definitely worth the read.
Definitely.
And surprising at how it really is kind of relevant still today, right? In terms of these thoughts on, we have similar kind of problems in our own society in terms of the vast disparity of, people that suffer versus, people that don't. And, how do we solve some of those problems, right?
Well, until we've achieved some kind of perfect society, we're always going to be trying to. And this book gives us an example of how one could be achieved if we're willing to make the sacrifices that come along with it. Right.
Which, I don't think is really prevalent a lot in a lot of kind of utopian dystopian novels, of being very explicit in terms of what is the price and how did society agree to pay it, right? That's something that stood out to me, right? When they very clearly explain, this is what happened with the 9 Years' War, and we made these choices, and we went down this path, and it's not the ideal. Maybe we've lost, art and passion and that kind of stuff, but it was better than the alternative.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 52. Wow. Our second episode together.
Yeah.
And thank you all for listening. We are going to do a live episode. I'm not sure when that's going to be at this point in time, mostly because I'm behind on editing our previous episode. And so I have to figure out sort of when we're releasing things and then when we're going to do the live. But if you want to know when the live comes, you can find news about that on our Facebook page, which you can get to by going to our website at blahblahblahmedia.com. That's BLAHBLAHBLAH media.com. Links to Facebook, links to Patreon, links to Buy Us Coffee, and links to the podcast itself.
So check it out.
Any last thoughts before we move on?
I think we'll save it for later.
Perfect. All right. Until next time,
I've been Peter Aman.
I've been Todd Sullivan.
Go read a fucking book.
Yeah.